Hi guys, and welcome to a new episode of Getting Into TV. I'm Tom, an AP within the world of documentary, and this is your home to learn all you need to know about working in drama, unscripted, documentary, natural history, on set and beyond. Each week I chat to a different person about what they do in the hope of just making TV a bit more inclusive for everyone. And this week I'm joined by Mel Rodrigues, who is the founder of Gritty Talent. Hi Mel, very excited to talk to you.
Hello, hiya Tom, nice to be here. I'll give you my audio description as well. I'm a dark-haired woman. I'm quite short. I've got like a denim jacket on, pink lippy. I'm mixed heritage, and I've also got funky earrings on as well.
White male, I've got an earring. As Mel described, I've got a funky shirt on. I'm wearing my glasses as well. I'm really excited just to talk to you about well, not only just about your career as a whole, because as we found, we both worked on the same show in some form, in some way or another, which is a very small world when you think about it, but also just about inclusivity and a bit about Gritty Talent as well, and just learn a bit more about what they do. I suppose the best place to start would be, can you just give us a brief intro, just a bit about yourself, how you got your career in TV, your background? What was it that made you want to work in the TV industry?
Sure. So I'm quite old now, but in the early noughties, I'd actually been at uni studying law in Bristol. I'm from the West Midlands originally, but my grand's in Cardiff, so that will explain why I ended up in Cardiff later. But I'd been studying law. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I suddenly got exposed to the amazing creative industry in Bristol and decided, oh, I could work in TV instead. So I quickly kind of pivoted into doing TV and worked my way up my career at BBC Birmingham. So I was living at home with my parents in their little granny flat in Redditch and driving into what was then Pebble Mill. And my first job was in current affairs and news because I'd done law. So I had that kind of skills. I know we'll talk about kind of, advice for new entry level talent later, but actually because I'd had that skill in legal, it was the thing that helped me find the way in. So it's always about what is the thing that you already know that
But that,
could
that
help.
that is important just to mention right now off the bat, is just because you might not necessarily do an apprenticeship or a course related to TV, that doesn't mean you won't get into TV. It is open to everyone in all industries. You can come into TV at any point.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to say that you don't need to have done a degree. But for me, because I had studied law, it meant that I was a safer pair of hands on current affairs and live shows because I knew about defamation, I knew about trespass, and I was thinking, with that kind of skill in my head. Quite quickly worked in current affairs, worked my way into more factual TV development. I was at BBC Birmingham for probably 2 or 3 years. And then Crime Watch came calling. So
Great show.
cue the blue lights. So I put my CV in and I applied for a researcher job on Crime Watch. I mean, I had no expectation that I would get given the job, but I went for an interview in London. In those days, I think, you had to probably go to London to grow your career. The majority of production was in London. Now I think that's really different, actually. There's so much production outside of London, but it was where I then cut my teeth. So I then did the live show for 2 years. I was making reconstructions. I was in my little flat in Acton mixing fake blood,
We've been
red
there on that show.
golden syrup, dash of blue food colouring, shake it up.
And then
Um,
stained hands for the rest of the week.
yeah, I mean, my housemate thought I'd actually been at the scene of a crime because my hands were covered. But Crime Watch was where I really learnt my craft. So I was doing live TV, I was doing drama recon, I was working with police forces, I was getting access to really sensitive stories. I was learning how to write a script. I was learning how to direct presenters and actors. So it was the most amazing experience in just getting that 360 appreciation of what production was like. I cut my teeth there and I had amazing colleagues and mentors on the production and in that wider community who supported me and I could see the potential in me. And, I really learned then, what it takes to work on different types of production and just what it takes to be part of a team, because you'll never do your best work alone. And actually shows like that absolutely rely on that, those relationships and communication, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, I mean, from my own experience, every role and every show in TV, it's one big team, and you want it to be the best kind of team, and you want to have people on there that are creative and fun, and just make it a really fun world. And yeah, I completely agree with you in regards to that. So obviously, you had your production career. You built all the way up to there, up to Crime Watch and so on. But now you're obviously at Gritty Talent. You founded Gritty Talent. What is Gritty Talent for a start? Can you just tell me a bit about what it is?
Yeah, so Gritty Talent, we're a talent and technology company, specifically look at removing barriers for creative talent who are from underrepresented groups, or who are having blocks to really getting their career to where they need it to be. The technology bit's important because I think to do this work well, you have to look at all the kind of the tools and the devices that you can use to do it well. And I think understanding data and metrics is a great way to understand what's going on. I won't go too techie, but we do a lot of looking at data and analytics and helping production companies, helping the broadcasters as well understand where the gaps are and where the skill gaps are as well, and how they can use that data to really inform supporting talent better. But at heart, what we are is a talent connecting service wrapped around with kind of inclusion. Funnily enough, obviously I had my amazing career. I didn't really have that many blockers to start off with, but I think I was very lucky because what I did have at that beginning was a supportive family, which meant that I could live at home for free. Those first 2 years of my career, when I was at BBC Pebble Mill, I didn't have that many living expenses. Like, my mum did charge me a bit of money for the washing machine and stuff, but I wasn't having to pay a London rent. So I had this amazing opportunity, and I now see that if you're coming from a background where you don't have, lots of finance and family support, actually those first few years can be really hard to navigate. You have to think about what our sector does. We are reflecting and representing global audiences. The global audiences that watch our content have to connect with and see a bit of themselves in what we do. We can't do that job very well if actually the only people who are working their way up the talent chain and in decision making roles are from a narrower group. And that's not to do down anyone from those more privileged groups, but the fact is you need your teams to be as representative and worldly kind of diverse as possible, so that you can achieve the great stuff for your audiences. And it's a business priority, which I think that particularly now in the global content market with Netflix and the streamers, YouTube, we cannot afford now not to see this as a priority. When I started Gritty, it was about, well, I'm quite impatient. I come from an amazing heritage. My dad is a mixture of Goan Indian and Portuguese, and he grew up in Kenya. My mum is from Essex originally. I grew up in the West Midlands, which was really diverse in lots of ways. In my childhood, I went to a drama group, which was from a mix of disabled and non-disabled kids. So I'd had all these experiences of actually inclusion and society being somewhere that could be really kind of supportive and galvanized. And then when I was in my kind of hiring roles or more senior roles in my TV career, I wasn't always seeing those same opportunities for lots of people. So Gritty became a bit of a kind of a passion for me to try and find better ways to do the work, and ways to do it that would be long-term impact as opposed to short-term gains or short-term initiatives.
And that's what we need. You don't just want people. You don't want it to be inclusive at the bottom. You want it to be inclusive all the way through. The more inclusive it can be as an industry, the more stories you can tell, the better the industry will be, which then not only reflects the audience, but gives back to an audience and makes their life even better. It's a massive circle.
No one can ever know everything. I'm not expecting an exec or a series producer or a PD to have perfect knowledge of the world. But a good example might be if you're making a film about the history of India, then people maybe perceive the Indian, different religions to be maybe Sikh, for example. But the Goan part of my family were all Catholics, and my gran used to use the rosary and say Hail Mary 50 times a day. So within India, there are so many different religions and subcultures that are really important to reflect. If you have a team with lots of different experiences and identities, you can tell stories and find contributors and get access and have that program really enriched, because you can embed bits of knowledge and understanding within your team. The majority of the world is not white. The majority of the world is not male. We're looking at least 20% upward of the world being disabled, long-term health condition, or neurodiverse. So the majority of the world, do not have high incomes. So, if you think about that, then you could think about the needs of your audiences. They really want to find characters, stories, and narratives that really connect with them and their lives. Otherwise, what are we doing? I think a lot of people know that, but doing it in practice is sometimes the thing where we can get a bit stuck, because
Yeah.
there are reasons why people from all different backgrounds haven't been able to progress as much as they should have been able to.
No, completely. And that brings me on perfectly to my next question, is just how can we achieve, as an industry, how can we achieve a more diverse workforce and inclusive workforce that is like truly representative of our audience? And also, one thing that I just want to mention that is what you brought to me in the email the other day is, I think what would be really good just for people listening is just to mention the phrase more diverse and why it should be more inclusive. I think that's just a really good thing to mention right now.
So I think people often hear the words, and there's a lot of jargon, isn't there? Like, and acronyms, EDI, D&I, which way do the letters go? It can get confusing. But I think it's really good to just describe what they mean. The word diversity in the widest sense means in any given group or situation, you have lots of different identities, lots of different types of people and groups. So we shouldn't really be saying that talent is diverse, that person is diverse, because it's not true. You only achieve diversity if you have plural. In a group, you have lots of different identities. So sometimes people fall in the trap of thinking that a Black person is diverse or a disabled person is diverse. No, we're all human, and you get diversity in a group when you have people with those different identities all included. So that's why I tend to use the word inclusion, because inclusion is about achieving diversity. And I describe talent as being underrepresented, i.e., it's not because they're a diverse person, it's because they're a person from a background which has had barriers to inclusion, and that's why they're currently underrepresented. And then the other word, the other jargony word to throw in, you hear it a lot in kind of government documents, is marginalised.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't like that word particularly, but it's an important word because it explains what has happened to certain groups. There are some groups in society that have had real structural constraints and barriers on them. You know, if we think about the LGBT community, you know, it was illegal, but you know, what, 40 odd years ago, same-sex relations, you know, it's those types of things. There have been barriers to groups which mean that life has been harder. If you're from non-white communities, you tend to be stigmatized because of lack of racial awareness. We're living in relatively recent times of equity, whereby equity has been carved out in legislation, but it isn't necessarily happening in everyday life because there's ingrained behaviours, there's ingrained attitudes, and change takes time. One of the things we do at Gritty, which is actually I think one of the most important things we do, is we work with indies and channels to grow inclusive leaders. So we've just actually finished running a 10 indie cohort in Cardiff. We had 10 production companies come on board for 3 months, and they've done some really intensive work, and it's all the senior leaders from those companies who attended, so that they can go out into their teams and be the change. And when they recruit people, when they're looking at training, when they're looking at removing barriers to progression, they've got the toolkit to do it, because it has to start top down. If we don't get managers and leaders to understand and do the work, then there's a real danger that amazing talent will come in, but because of the things that aren't, you know, working, they'll leave again.
Talking about that scheme and that program that you just had in Cardiff, what steps is Gritty Talent taking to make the industry more inclusive, and what role, you mentioned obviously about technology, what role does technology play in achieving that?
I think my first confession is that I'm not a natural born technologist. I've not really learned to code, but another thing that I did in my spare time for about 7-8 years, I ran TEDx Bristol, which was Bristol's TED Talks, and so I got to work with a lot of technology founders, and I just learned something from them, which was to build great inclusive technology, you don't need to know how to code, but you need to understand the problem so that you can bring people in to help you design the solution. So that gave me this idea for Gritty's approach, which is by looking at diversity and inclusion and skills gaps via the data. And the important thing about data is that if you can gather good data, it can give you insights, it can give you patterns. And then when you have those insights, you can work out what are the things that we can try to change that situation. And you can measure the impact. So you can change one thing, you can collect data to see whether you've actually created the impact you thought. So it's a kind of it's a try, refine and test principle, which techie people listening will completely get, but I don't think we can solve the inclusion challenges in TV if we don't do it at scale. I think we need to look at the much broader picture and understand why things are happening. And being able to analyze good data sets is your first step towards that. So that's our approach. So we collect data with the production companies. I have no idea if this is going to long term be the solution, but I'm a big fan of trying things that people haven't tried before. And what I'd say about TV and film and creative practice is that we're all innovators. We all come up with solutions every day of the week to make stuff happen, because in TV things tend to fall down a lot. So I've actually found innovating in this space, actually, I didn't realize it, but it's actually a skill that I had because I was quite good at problem solving in my job as a producer.
We've spoken a lot so far about what you do as a company and what you do in order to help that inclusivity. But a lot of my audience is people getting into telly. How can Gritty Talent help
Yeah.
those at the start of their career? And how can you also support their career development of underrepresented talent?
If you are interested in working in TV and film, or if you are already working in the sector and you believe that you are underrepresented in one or more ways, or you've been facing some barriers, I'll explain a bit more about what they are like in a bit. But you can go straight onto our website and just send us your CV. So the website is grittytalent.tv. Our work with talent is always free. One of the structural barriers to this industry is finance. So it's free to send us your CV. If you agree to us being able to use your CV, you're then on our database. And then what happens is we have production companies and channels come to us who will ask us to find them creative talent for either a new production or do a talent pool. So, for example, for Channel 4, for ITV, we put together quite large lists of people that they don't know about. And the most important thing is we're not telling them people's protected characteristics. We're not telling them in what ways they're underrepresented. What we're doing is going, this is Tom. Tom's amazing. This is his skill set. By the way, as well as doing a TV job, he also runs a podcast. He's a safe pair of hands. So we'll kind of do that matching in as and when people are crewing up. At the moment, the TV sector is in a bit of a state. We've had a real slowdown on commissions. There's a big restructuring going on while people work out what the market's going to look like. So we recognise there's not a lot of work out there at the moment, but what there is training, and there are opportunities for networking and mentoring and being able to really grow your skill set and grow your network, because the market will come back. I don't know what shape and size it will be, but when it comes back, people will need good, skilled, interesting talent. So what we also do is we have our monthly talent newsletter, which we signpost all of the free training, bursaries, funds for independent films, networking. And the other thing we do is we run a lot of the training on behalf of Screen Skills. So I'd say just sign up to our newsletter, ping us your CV, and we can't guarantee you'll get work from it, but if you're on our radar, the next time that production company comes calling, we can look at your skill set and match you in if they're looking for talent for particular jobs.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of the time I get asked questions of like the best advice you can have for someone getting into TV. I spoke to someone the other day. It's like, what advice do you have? And I said to them, it's like, just send your emails to people, send CVs, and just be on people's radars. My boyfriend, for instance, he wants to get into the art department. He's like, how am I going to do it? And I'm like, email people, like just constantly email people, because unless people know that you're free or available or who you are, you're not going to get that job.
Absolutely. I think the thing that I think we have to just acknowledge is I don't think the industry's way of recruiting people is going to change that much. So it's always going to be, because of the nature of the work, it's often freelance, it's often quite last minute. You're not going to get that many roles where there's going to be a 3-month recruitment process and a job ad that gets seen in a permanent role at the end. Those types of jobs in TV are quite rare now. So what we have to understand is that being visible to recruiters, to talent managers, to employers is so important. What does that mean? It means your CV being on our database as well. It means you going to networking. And this is one of the barriers that particularly talent from neurodiverse groups and talent who maybe have socioeconomic barriers. The networking culture can be a real block, because You've got to go to a bar and pay for a glass of wine that you can't afford. Transport to get to networking can be expensive. If you're a carer, if you've got children or you're caring for relatives. Also for talent who are neurodivergent, you've got like the sheer kind of the barrier of being in a busy room that's noisy and quite alarming at points, and being able to read visual cues. So quite often networking can actually exclude people without it being realized. So one of the things that we've tried to do at Gritty is create much more accessible networking events. So we'll curate an event with far fewer people in it, and we'll have spent time getting people matching in the CVs and making sure there's a good ratio of talent to hiring managers in the room, and putting in lots of rest breaks, having a quiet room, checking the acoustics, and creating a way to make sure the experience is one that everyone can have their best time in, regardless of your background and what your access needs might be. This is something we did with the 10 indies in Wales. We had 10 indies in the room, and we had 16 talent from deaf, disabled and or neurodivergent groups, and we really made sure we were matching them in based on skill sets. We made the conversations quite short. We made sure we briefed them. So I think there are definitely ways to make that process much more accessible. We're taking time as an industry to really understand what those different ways of doing things are. It's a portfolio freelance career. Your CV needs to be in front of people. You need to be meeting people, and also don't underestimate the power of your peer network. Mixing with other people who are either in similar roles or similar journeys on their career. You need that support of people around you to help you stay buoyant and thrive, and share advice and share experience.
I completely agree with you. I'm basically on an AP program at the minute. I'm really lucky to have APs at my level that I can talk to. But before I was on that program, them 4 years in the TV industry, obviously I had my peers, I had my friends, but it was very lonely. I totally get you when you mentioned the whole loneliness thing. So I felt it myself. It can be quite hard, especially when you're out of work. It can be so discouraging when you don't have that support networks. Completely agree with you. We spoke a lot. Well, you mentioned in there barriers. What are the most significant barriers to underrepresented talent in TV, and how can they be overcome? I think we've kind of touched on it, but if we just go into it a little bit more.
I'm going to put them into a few different buckets. So I've spoken about the first bucket a bit already, which is the financial bucket. If you're from an underrepresented group, you're less likely to have come from a background where there's lots of financial affluence. So immediately, you know, there's not going to be the social mobility that some other people have to get in and get on. My second bucket is cultural. So I don't know whether you have heard of the term affinity bias. Again, it's a bit of jargon, but it's human nature. We tend to like people who are like ourselves. This comes from our cave days when we had to decide, is this a human or is this a woolly mammoth? So basically, very subconsciously, people make decisions about who they like based on how like you they are. So not just what you look like, but if you've had a similar educational background, if you sound similar, if you look similar, if you've got things in common. I'll give you a good example. If someone is Nigerian born, female director, the person that interviews them may have very little touch points with that background. And it doesn't mean that they don't like them, but sometimes it means that people have this kind of steeper climb in order to become trusted and familiar. And if you're disabled, there's a real challenge in people perceiving you, therefore, not to be able to physically or mentally do the job, which is untrue. So you have to spend more time convincing people that you can do the job. So challenging your biases in the hiring process is the biggest thing that people who are managing teams and hiring teams can do, because great talent comes from everywhere and you don't know what you don't know. And the third bucket I'm going to talk about is more about structural barriers. So these are the things that make it harder to do a job. So if I'm a single parent and I've got school pickup and drop-offs, or if I'm someone with a long-term health condition and I have to take an injection twice a day, sometimes doing the hours and being on location, the types of things that TV work requires, means that it's really hard for me to do this job. An example is, you know, there were times when I was directing shoots when I was the only woman on a shoot. And if I was on my period, I was the only person that needed regular access to a bathroom. You know, the men could go for 5 hours without going for a wee. If you're a woman, you're probably going to need to access a bathroom sooner than that. Immediately, because I was the minority gender identity in that group, people hadn't thought about my needs when they were thinking about the shoot. So, I used to be a stickler, but regardless of whether I was on my period or not, I'd always say, where are the nearest loos and do we have access to them and do we need a key? Because actually, if I'm directing a shoot, I don't want to be worrying about that. I need to go and do my best work.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be worrying about if I can get access to a bathroom. I call them invisible because if you haven't experienced it, people sometimes don't see that there's an issue. And someone might think I'm having a down day. Actually, it's not because I'm having a down day because I'm upset. It's because there's an issue here which is stopping me from doing my best work. So I think that if you put those buckets together, what they equal is the reasons why underrepresented talent are underrepresented, because it's a harder climb. And even when you get in, there's stuff in your way.
Completely. And it's like you say, it's about sitting down and looking like what we need to do to, for instance, the toilet analogy is a perfect analogy. It's what can we look for or put or needs to be there in order to make life easier for everyone. How do you think that the TV industry, or what do you believe that the TV industry can do to become more inclusive? And how optimistic are you that then changes can happen? Because it's so easy as talking about it, just referencing the Channel 4 thing that came out a few weeks ago about 1 in 12 creatives in drama from a working class background. You see all of these programs and schemes to boost inclusivity, but how can the industry go about making sure it actually happens rather than just talking about it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing to say is that structural change is really hard. The first thing is like, we shouldn't be pointing fingers and blaming people and giving people a hard time, because a lot of people in senior management roles have inherited bad structures. So they're working with stuff that is not set up the way it could be. So, but because once they recognise that, it is then their job to start to dismantle some of the structures that are stopping fantastic talent from all backgrounds from progressing and thriving. So this is why we do the inclusion accelerator work with senior leaders from production companies and channels, because it has to be top down. You create that regime change person by person. The UK's TV sector is, I'm going to stick my neck out and go, leading in inclusion in many ways, because we're one of the very few sectors in the UK, if not the world, who have a sector-wide way of measuring and trying to act on the data that comes out. The data sets are far from perfect. There's things that we could challenge here, but roughly a third of all productions made in the UK that are supplying the main broadcasters are reporting into Diamond, which is run by the Creative Diversity Network. And supported by all those major broadcasters as funding partners. What that means is there may be issues with the data set. We may not understand whether what we're collecting is 100% right, but we're getting a snapshot of what's going on in our sector, and that enables us to make decisions. So over the last 8 years, all of the UK broadcasters, or the vast majority of them actually anyway, have brought in diversity targets. And it doesn't mean that productions are meeting them, but it means when productions are crewing up and when they have conversations with their commissioners and when their budgets are being decided and when they're being greenlit, when they're getting business, they are having to have a conversation with their commissioner about how they're going to ensure their team is as inclusive as it could be and how they're going to give talent opportunities to progress and step up and get nurturing. I don't know that many industries who have that conversation every time they start a new project. So we're actually doing some really good work. The problem is when you start to do the work, the landscape expands in front of you and you see how much more work you've got to do now you're on that journey. So I think we've got a long way to go, but we've already made some really difficult strides in establishing where our problems are. And that's the first step to being able to correct your course.
Definitely. And hopefully it can continue and we can become even better at it. We've spoken a lot about what you do and how you can help people. Can you share any success stories or notable impacts that Gritty Talent has had on the industry or on individuals' careers?
In 2022, we ran the Producer Pathways training for screen skills, and that was about 80 APs who had faced barriers but really wanted to step up and were ready to step up into more producer roles or bigger roles of responsibility. And we've had an overwhelming number of them come back saying, I got my promotion, I got the gig I wanted, I'm now a team leader, I'm now a PD. I think the wins are one person at a time, one day at a time. There's a couple of really well-known formats. I won't name the programs, but they're ones that a lot of people watch and love, and they come back every year. And we've been placing runners and entry-level roles on those programs, and then those runners have gone on to be researchers, or they've been hired on other big known, well-known format. And they're all people from underrepresented groups who would have faced a real steep climb to get that first job. The magic for me is when you see a door unlocked for someone which was previously locked. So a good example about those runners was at least 3 out of the 5, I think, didn't have a driving license yet. But we had a conversation with the production about the fact that, well, do you need all your runners to be able to drive all the time? Or actually, can some of them be location-based or studio-based? In the meantime, we're signposting the runners to the bursaries and the funds they can apply for via Screen Skills, TV and Film Charity, etc., to help them start to get some funding for their driving lessons. So it's about unpicking the barriers one bit at a time. So rather than having a big, glorious, glitzy impact that I can share with you, I'd say that it's the ripple effect of those people, because they are now in the industry. And my hope is that because they're now role models for other people coming through. And when they become hiring managers, they will understand these barriers and they will make decisions to help people thrive and get the job that they deserve as well.
And I think it goes back to what we said earlier, yes, okay, we need people at the top to work it all the way down, but informing people and having conversations like this for people early on really will help that conversation through their career. And I think what you're doing is great, really. So it's nice to know, really, that you are getting people in there. And I think it's nice for people to actually hear that it works, and it's not just we want to do this and hope that it happens, but it's nice for people to actually hear that it works.
It's happening. I mean, the thing that I have to say is that, we help unlock the door, but the rest, actually, that person then has to go through the door and make the most of being in that room. Getting in is great, but actually, what we try and do with our talent is help them see how they can make the most of those jobs and look at their skill gaps and where they want to learn and where they need support. What are the things that we can help? What are the things they can do to kind of continue to get their professional development? So, it's continuous, lifelong effort, I'm afraid. You don't just get in and then that's it.
Definitely.
But if the door has been opened and there are ways for you to walk through it and feel great and do your best work, then I think that for me is a good kind of starter for success, isn't it?
What advice would you give to underrepresented individuals aspiring to enter the TV industry? Because it can be daunting, it can be scary. I mean, looking back on when I was trying to get into telly, I remember my final year in uni, I was applying to everything and anything and not getting any responses. And even now, you apply to things and you don't get them response. It can be really disheartening. Like we said earlier, it can be quite lonely. So what advice would you give to people?
So I think if you are from an underrepresented group, I think the first thing is to not let that fact be a blocker or a reason why you feel it's not going to work for you. The industry needs you. It needs your skill. It needs your perspective. It needs your experiences. And you have every right to be in the sector. So don't let that be a thing that holds you back. If you are from an underrepresented group, actually, there's now a huge amount of positive action initiatives across the sector to really help remove some of these barriers for you. You don't have to declare what your identity is to anyone. That's your personal business. Some things are visible, some things are non-visible. But the point is, there are ways for you to get support. We can put this link in the text as well, but Gritty Talent's website has a resource page for talent where you can go and follow lots of links to various initiatives, bursaries, schemes. There's loads out there. Your challenge is going to be choosing which ones to apply for. So I think go for it. The second thing is about starting to create your network of both mentors and peers, because your journey through this industry is going to be about those connections and collaborating and working on projects together. So start to grow your community. And one of the best ways that you can do that is just turn up at stuff. There's lots of free events, both online and in person. Hoover up all the knowledge you can from those events. We had some tips, we can link to this as well on our Instagram and our TikTok tips about networking and how to take the pain out of networking, practice networking and gather new contact. I'm quite a confident person, but I also hate networking because it's that immediate feeling of being exposed and vulnerable and your mouth drying up and all those things. But there are ways to try to make it less painful. I think particularly right now, the industry is in a difficult spot, and talent managers, production companies, Gritty Talent included, we are overwhelmed by CVs and applications. And I know that people are doing their best to get through them and reply. There is a basic demand and supply issue right now, whereby the demand for talent, because of the commissioning problem, is lower than the amount of talent available. That means that some people are getting a couple of hundred applications per job. This won't be forever, but at the moment it means that you may not always get selected for an interview or a chat, or you may not even get a reply. I know so many people in the industry are really trying to do best practice and communications and try and give everyone at least, even if it's a one line, but just to let people know where they stand. I know people are trying hard to get replies out, but sometimes people are massively overwhelmed and under-resourced. So I'd say understand the industry at the moment's in a bit of a spot, but you can't take it to heart. You have to see that this is the bigger picture, and that, if you're not getting immediate success, look at the other things you can do to boost your CV. If you need to take employment elsewhere, I don't think that's a problem. I think people will understand that. And actually, I think you can put that on your CV, because everyone will remember what happened in TV 2023 and 2024 is that there wasn't the work to go around. Don't be afraid if you have had to take a break from working in production to be able to explain, actually, do you know what? There wasn't the work out there, so I went and I did 4 days a week as a teaching assistant, whatever it is. Don't feel weird about going and getting other paid experiences that help you show why you're a really versatile, interesting person to work in the creative sector when jobs do arise, and when the market hopefully does come back.
Definitely. And it will, like you say, it will. I've got one more question for you. What are you watching on TV and what are you listening to with podcasts? You'll be surprised how many people make me wait for about 5 minutes whilst they go and think.
Right, so I'm going to tell you about my lovely unguilty pleasure. I've been really enjoying on the BBC iPlayer I Kissed a Girl, and before I Kissed a Girl it was I Kissed a Boy. And the reason I love it is because not only because it's very inclusive, but the characters are I think they're lush, and who wouldn't want to have a pool party in Italy? I'm a straight person. I have lots of friends from the LGBT community, but I hadn't really learned a huge amount about what it's like to date if you're gay. And so I've actually learned quite a lot from it and just find it quite fun as well. So I've been loving watching that. So it's really highbrow, my viewing choices.
You do. I mean, I love it. I mean, I need to catch up on I Kissed the Girl, but I loved I Kissed the Boy. It was one of them things where there was no nastiness about it. It was just happy, and it was a celebration, which is actually what that community is all about. And it was just really nice and really.
Also, like, I get tips on like what to wear, because like some of the girls in it are just wearing those beautiful bikinis and earrings and stuff. But also Danny Minogue is a icon of mine. I really love the fact that yes, it's a reality format, but it's not throwing people to the lions. It's actually a really warm, exciting, sexy format.
Yeah.
So this is my serious head now. I've been listening to things that are kind of connected to the tech challenges that I have, and also the business challenges I have as someone who runs her own company. So I quite often listen to something called Fixable, which is part of the TED network of different podcast titles.
I mean, you just put me to shame with what you're watching and listening to, because I mean, the thing that I'm watching at the minute, in the morning we put on classic Coronation Street on ITV. Oh, and Only Murders in the Building Series 3. But it's been great chatting to you, Mel. I really appreciate just hearing a bit about about your career and what you're doing to make the industry a better place, because it is a great place. It can just be even better. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I am the eternal optimist. And yes, there are some big thorny problems, but if everyone takes that kind of solution-based approach and commits to learning and commits to listening, we're all really creative people. We'll do it. We'll smash it. But we just all need to kind of sometimes take a step back and think about what we can do individually and in the companies that we're in as well.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate chatting.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.